My work friends and I were out at our favorite bar last night. Not a really fancy place, but you know, cheap beer and close enough to home that I don't have to drive. The night started out normally enough. The four of us crammed into a small table off in the corner, mostly talking shop and dumping on our boss. Being this was the middle of the week, there weren't too many other people around. Maybe around 8 or 9 others in the entire building. Everybody was just kind of keeping to themselves, sort of people you'd expect to see in a bar on a Wednesday evening. After having a few drinks and generally carrying on, I happened to glance over one of my coworkers' shoulders. From where we were sitting, I had a pretty good view of the television just behind the bar. Jessie, the bartender, was lazily flipping through the channels when she stopped for a moment. On the screen was a brief burst of oranges and reds, which I registered as a fire. Then I noticed the logo in the lower corner of the screen. It was our local news station. I'm not sure why, but I was locked in on that orange glow coming from the screen. Suddenly, the channel switched to a sports network as I watched Jessie nod to one of the patrons at the bar. Something about that news broadcast seemed oddly familiar though. "Hey Jess," I called out, grabbing her attention from across the bar. "Could you, switch the channel back real quick?" She nodded and the news returned. And almost immediately I recognized the building in the frame. It was my building, and it was on fire. "Oh my God," I said, loud enough that a few people sitting near me followed my gaze to the TV. "That's my apartment." The minimal chatter in the bar fell silent at my statement, everybody now staring up at the screen. The screen showed a wide shot of the exterior of my building. The cameraman must have been set up on the northern end of the block, because I could see a lot of shops on the ground floor, property management, dry cleaners, convenience mart, etc. Most of the building was still intact. Actually, if you looked at my building from a different angle, you might not have noticed anything wrong with it at all. The top left corner of the building, however, was engulfed in flames. I say engulfed, but honestly, it wasn't a large fire by any means. It looked like only a couple units near the top 4 floors had been affected, but I knew that could quickly change. Oranges and reds like a setting sun vented out of the 2 windows, exhaling a thick smoke into the air that blended with the night sky. "Jesus, man," one of my coworkers said aloud. That sucks." There was an uncomfortable murmur of agreement that danced around the table. I mean, I didn't blame them, to be honest. I wouldn't know what to say in this situation either. "Yep," I agreed, just as awkwardly. Truth be told, there wasn't much I could do about it anyway. I didn't have very many belongings, but I did have renter's insurance, so all I could really do was watch. Thankfully, my apartment is only about halfway up the building, and located on the west side of it. I crossed my fingers, hoping my stuff would be okay regardless. The news feed then cut to a reporter on the scene. He was a thin man who seemed almost excited to be out there, as if it were his first story. He was standing a little further away from the building itself. Looking at the shops in the background, I could tell he was across the street on the northwest corner of the building. "Firefighters are expected on the scene at any moment," he said, firmly pressing into his earpiece. "And hopefully they'll be able to contain this inferno before it spreads any further. As I was saying earlier, it is very fortunate that everyone was able to evacuate the building safely before things got really bad, or who knows what tragic events may have unfolded." Well, he's laying it on a little thick, don't you think? My other coworker joked. I found myself chuckling a bit. All things considered, at that moment it truly didn't seem all that bad. But then, a few moments later, "Hang on a minute," the reporter said as the cameraman panned back to him. "We're getting some updated information. It seems... Hang on one moment while we readjust the camera." The cameraman started to shift the angle, focusing on an area of the building about halfway up the west side. All of the lights in the entire building were out, except for one. I started to feel a strange creeping sensation build in the pit of my stomach as I began counting the windows from the bottom. 5 up, 2 over. That's my place. I could have sworn I turned out that light, I thought to myself. And that's when I see it. There's a person standing in my window. The camera was zoomed out too far to make out any of the features, but it definitely looked like a man, and they were definitely standing in my apartment. I stared petrified as the camera zoomed in closer, the reporter babbling on about the overlooked, ill-fated soul still trapped in the blazing such and such. As the image grew closer on the screen, I began to make out more details. The person seemed to be dancing or something. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but the man was moving around a lot, and everything he was doing had this bizarre, almost rhythmic quality to it. He started waving his arms in the air, back and forth, up and down, up and down. He paused for a moment, then started banging both fists on the window. After a few hits, he once again went back to waving his arms over his head. Everything he was doing had the same exact tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. After another brief moment, he started to jump up and down, waving his arms around wildly. Almost like he was trying to get someone's attention from a long distance, but it was still to that exact rhythm, over and over again. "What in the hell?" I said, my voice now a hoarse whisper. The camera then got a little closer, and even though it was a bit grainy, I could finally make out the person's features. It looked almost exactly like me. He was wearing the exact same clothing that I was wearing in the bar. Clothes I had changed into moments before leaving the apartment earlier. Its face looked almost exactly like mine as well, except for its eyes. Its eyes were far too big for a normal person's. It also had this almost comical look of horror on its face. I don't even know how to describe it. Imagine if someone were pretending to look scared, but as a joke. It would have almost seemed funny if the circumstances were any different. But instead, it was just extremely unnerving. No one in the bar made a sound. Everyone was fixed on the TV. The person was still swaying and waving around, beating its hands on the glass or jumping in circles. I almost didn't hear the reporter mention the fact that the firefighters have rushed into the building and are now heading for my floor. Oh no, I thought, without really understanding what was happening. Please, don't go in there. I stared transfixed at the screen. I could feel my eyes growing dry as I refused to blink. From this angle, you could just barely see the top of my front door through the window, not too far behind where this creature was flailing about. At that moment, it was holding its face in its hands and shaking its head from side to side as if saying no. Suddenly, the door behind it bursts open, presumably the firefighters entering my apartment. The creature stopped moving. For a split second, I could see its expression change. The comical look of horror had faded and was replaced by a huge smile filled with enormous, jagged teeth. It turned in place to face the firefighters. Then, the lights went out. We all just sat there dumbfounded, staring at the screen as the camera slowly zoomed out from the now darkened window. No one in the bar said anything as we all quietly paid our bills and left. I went directly to my sister's place across town and asked to stay with her for a little while. I had told her there was a fire at my apartment and she gladly let me crash at her place. When I tried to find the footage from the news online later that night, It seemed like they had edited that entire last part out. I don't know if any of you on here know what that thing was, but I hope to God they didn't put out that fire. I hope they let that whole entire place burn to the ground.